youth sports has become commercialized.
What is the impact of that on young people?
The challenge with that is that you have like 8-year-olds committing to colleges.
That's wild.
The entire system is set up to encourage specialization.
Two of your clients, like Simone Biles and Michael Phelps, have become, really prominent advocates in the dialogue around this.
This is not unique to the Olympics. This is life. This is sports. I think it's a matter of
Cool. Peter, thanks for doing this. It's exciting to have this opportunity to talk to you. I really enjoyed meeting you in Paris. That was almost a year ago. Exactly. It took a year to get you in front of me. And I just wanted to shout out to everybody at Whoop for creating a home for this podcast in Boston. Whoop has opened up their podcast studio to allow this conversation to happen. And you drove down from your home in Maine to do it. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I wanted to start with something that you said that I think kind of opens up the door to a conversation around mental health that I want to have with you. And what you said was, competitive success is enhanced by diversity of experience, enhanced by prioritizing mental wellness. So I just wanted to give you the opportunity to explain what that means and expound upon it.
Well, I think that I said that is kind of interesting to me because I'd say you could probably have it either way, in the sense that I think many people in a narrow sense would say competitive success is enhanced by specialization, by a narrow focus, and not by diversity of experience. And I think that's part of the problem in sports today. But I think that in terms of success generally, it's the diversity of experience that matters the most. And I think when you get to the highest level of sports, that's when you get the perspective where they're saying, hey, I realize that the predominant viewpoint is specialize, get very good at this one thing, and that will take you the furthest. But they then will say, once they're there, actually, it was all of these other experiences and this balance that enabled me to achieve that success. And I think that's the tricky situation. Which do you choose? Which path?
It is a counterintuitive thing. And I think that sports, we're of a similar age. We've borne witness to many changes in sports from when we were kids, where it was about fun and community. And now it's about hyper specialization and, bringing in experts. And, if you're a young kid who's showing promise, like there's going to be, kind of a bum rushing effect that takes place there. And what does that do to a young person's mind when suddenly, that kind of enters the picture and puts them on a trajectory such that if they are lucky enough to reach that elite level, that's when they suddenly come onto your radar. By the time, you're getting involved in athletes' lives, they're at the kind of later stages of all of that. And I would have to imagine or presume that this is what has, given birth to your concerns and your passion around the mental well-being of the athletes that you work with, and what that means or what needs to be done with respect, sort of systemically about sports writ large.
Yeah, I think that if you think about it, it happens at such a young age, and it may not have when we were coming up, but nowadays the entire system is set up to encourage specialization. You have like 8-year-olds committing to colleges.
Is that true?
Yeah, no, it's true. If you look at social media, I don't know how it works because where's the enforceability of that? But they'll commit to college at ages, before they've gone through puberty to play football, say at Oregon.
That's wild. Yeah, I had no idea it was that deep.
Yeah, it can be that deep. And moreover, it's you've got social media, you've got the fact that if you show promise at a young age, and of course with sports being so much more organized now at the younger ages, that you've got social media, you've got all of these influences and pressures, and parents, of course, how does it feel as a parent if your child has been identified as someone with that unique potential to play in college, to go beyond that, whatever, even at a young age. So if your kid is starting to play sports at the age of 7, think of the impact on the child.
Yeah.
Because all of the peers begin to think, well, this kid is special. The parents, the other parents, the coaches treat them differently. They go to school, they're treated differently. And you can so easily see how tempting it is to just narrow the focus. Like, this is the answer. This is what makes me special. And, so long before I ever meet these athletes, their identity is, well established. And I'd say it's so narrowly based that it's, in my view, it becomes problematic outside of the sport.
And that identity is sort of indelibly woven into performance, like as an athlete. Like, there is no identity outside of that, which can't help but be deranging, especially on a young mind that isn't fully formed, and deranging on the parents. Like, what happens when you're that young and the world starts to, kind of cater to you or bow to you and cohere to, whatever it is that you want and need. And then they reach the peak, and, invariably things don't always go as planned, right? And what happens, when that happens, or what happens when they get injured and they can't do that anymore, or they've done their Olympic thing and then it's over and they have to become a civilian.
Yeah, it's an existential threat, all of that. And if you think about all of the athletes that are fortunate enough to qualify for the Olympics, they dream of gold, and how many win gold? So what is that experience? Is it that that's a disappointment? That's a letdown? Do they stay in it longer because they're that close to the answer to all of their problems, or what? And for the people that win gold, I would argue that it's just as much of a problem, if not more, because you've eliminated the one potential answer.
Right. And when that hole inside of you still isn't filled by that, what does that augur, in terms of like what life is about? But even in the best case scenario, they win Olympic gold. What does their life look like once they can't compete anymore? There's only, one Michael Phelps or Simone Biles. And, having attended the Olympics this past summer, how many names do you remember that are going to be able to create something long-term and sustainable on the heels of their performance at that Olympics? There aren't very many.
No. And what is that fulfillment? I mean, the fulfillment itself, it's like peer-to-peer comparison. It's results-oriented. It's times. It's marks. It's whatever historical, measurements that they are driven by. And when you take yourself out of that system, what are you left with?
And if you lack that diversity of experience and you're so self-identified with your identity as an athlete and performance, you don't have anything to fall back on to become a fully rounded human being.
Right. You've got to get to know yourself for the first time almost.
I'm sure you've seen, many varieties of that existential crisis bloom, over the many years that you've been doing what you've been doing.
Yeah. I mean, I think from the beginning, I would say, I don't know, the more than 90%, all of them, I can't think of too many exceptions of the athletes that I've worked with over the years. They don't all win gold medals, but it doesn't matter. Just the Olympic experience, I think, is so difficult for athletes to process, and to get there, there's so much sacrifice, there's so much imbalance that when they come out of the Olympic Games. So I'm not talking about retirement. I'm talking about whether you could compete in 3 different Olympics, but in my experience, the overwhelming majority of athletes suffer what has now been, called the post-Olympic blues or whatever it may be. But there's a very, very difficult transition coming from the Olympics back to civilian life, or back to whatever that life is. It may be going back into college. You're still competing. It doesn't really matter, because you go from relative anonymity to this global stage where really the whole world is kind of celebrating what you do. And then it's football season, we're done. Now you drift off into, and it's very hard, I think, and abrupt. It's just difficult, I think, to process that, to make sense of that. I'm not sure it does make sense. And I think that athletes really suffer for that. I noticed that throughout and saw so many athletes struggling with it. In thinking about it, you kind of trace it all the way back to when they were kids. And I think, watching the clients that I've had as I raised my own kids, I think that was, like, for me, informed a lot of the way I think about it and have thought about it. And also the way I've tried to, support my clients through that process, because you can see, wow, these things that are happening to my kids, and they don't have that type of ability, but I can see how it's affecting them
just through their own involvement in youth sports
and just youth sports,
high school sports and stuff like that.
Yeah, not even high school. I mean, I think I struggled with it. My oldest son, he was 7 years old, and if he was going to play ice hockey, that was all he was going to play, at least for like a significant part of the year. And I just thought that was insane, honestly.
It's almost like the 70s Soviet era, kind of like we're choosing who you're going to be at a very young age, and you're going to get, it's a farm system from the moment you enter the picture of youth sports.
Yeah, and I would resist that for them, in the sense that I would say, well, no, that's fine, you play ice hockey, but you love soccer, so you're going to play soccer, and you love baseball, let's say. So I would have to sort of play defense just to provide enough space for them to play multiple sports, in addition to like whatever you're doing around the neighborhood. I mean, I grew up playing. I love all sports. I mean, and that to me is a healthy way to do it. But to play 3 sports at the age of 7 to 10 required me to intervene. And what was crazy is I couldn't effectively intervene.
And was it the coaches or the leagues, or what was it? Where was the resistance coming from?
All of it, and it may trickle down, but it becomes all of it, right? In the sense that I would tell the hockey coach, the hockey, administration, like, look, I understand that you're going to start, the season or practice in August, but my son plays soccer too, and so he's going to play that, and he'll join the team in November. And you'll find somewhere.
Yeah, no, you can't do that. You gotta pick, and you can only do one or the other, because we start. They overlap, or they're competing with each other.
They're competing with each other, or if they say like, okay, we encourage that, they don't mean it. It's that, okay. So he never did do the early hockey. He would play soccer and then play hockey. But once you're back on the team, you're ostracized, because parents are resentful that their kids may not be getting that ice time because this kid came in late, and the child is feeling, somewhat isolated in that way. So it's very, very hard to, allow for, that diversity of experience within sports. And it becomes just a slippery slope into specialization.
We encourage that, but only in lip service, right? Like, there is an understanding, like, yeah, that would be better for the kid, but that's not actually what we're doing. And the irony, of course, is that what you're saying is true. Like, a diversity of experiences, even in the best cases with the most elite athlete, is going to be the better path. Like, I'm sure you've read David Epstein's book, Range. Like, this is like the Bible on this, like tracking all of these incredible high performers and realizing that, our illusion that like they were hyper-focused from day one is nothing more than that, an illusion. And in fact, why they're so good and why they have such longevity in their career is because they're drawing on so many different influences, over the course of their life that contribute, that create this like sort of recipe for greatness.
The challenge with that is that youth sports has become commercialized. And so if you've built a business that benefits from having, these 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds in your system 10 months out of the year, you don't want to lose them, for half of that time. So it's lip service. It's also lip service in terms of like, this isn't about results. It's not about getting a college scholarship. This is about character building. All of the things that we all know to be true. There is this temptation, and of course now the system being so commercialized, it's very, very difficult for parents and kids to actually follow that recipe.
Yeah, it's the incentives are misaligned,
Yes.
especially now with NIL rights in college, and that's just going to continue to expand the commercialization all the way down to the root and at the very beginning. What is the impact of that on young people?
Yeah, and I mean, and culturally, it's if you're in high school or even in middle school, and you're seeing the NIL stuff, you're seeing like the value of social media, the value of results, the value of peer-to-peer comparisons, and you aspire to that. I mean, what kids don't? I mean, you grow up watching SportsCenter, you want to be on SportsCenter. It's like slightly different now with social media, but with the NIL stuff, that is, from a short-term perspective, that sort of lends credence to specialization, doesn't it? I mean, because you can surpass your peers, make yourself more attractive to coaches, to your social media audience, to potential NIL deals, whatever it may be, to exposure. And so you take that route.
Yeah. The conversation, the discourse around mental health and high performance is much more robust than in past years. Like, we are talking about this in no small part because of, two of your clients like Simone Biles and Michael Phelps, who have become, really prominent advocates in the dialogue around this. But there's still a lot of work to be done. And, when we had lunch in Paris, like, you painted a very different picture than what I imagined with respect to governing bodies at the higher echelons of sport with respect to how they're contending with this.
Yeah, I mean, there's, the Olympics is big business, and in the Olympic brand stands for a certain, purity, I think. And I think, when Michael was going through some of his issues, that was the last thing that these governing bodies wanted to deal with, right? I mean, you could have just said, look, this is not unique to the Olympics. This is life. This is sports. And so, we need to, consider that and think about how we can best support these athletes. But, that's, it also impacts the brand. Well, wait a minute. Is the Olympics causing this? Are these organizations like exacerbating the problem? And if the thought immediately goes, well, how does that affect sponsorship? How does that affect, how, our audience views the Olympic brand? It becomes a more defensive, situation, and like, well, let's contain that rather than let's shed light on it. Let's talk about it. Let's address it. And I think that there was an effort, I think, at the outset to do that. And then ultimately, I think the only reason it was, it's been handled a little bit differently now, and as you say, it's more a part of the conversation, is because it was like, there's no stopping it. I mean, you can't fight the tide. This is our reality. And so now we actually have to try to do something about it. But I think the motivation matters, both in terms of when you start to address those problems and also how aggressively and effectively you address them.
What is the gap between the lip service version of this with the governing bodies and real substantive, attention and programming and support? Because when I think of whether it's USA Swimming or USA Gymnastics, like these are sports that have a long history of not great behavior, coach abuse, things like that. Many occasions in which there were attempts to sweep these things under the rug. And it took a long time for this to percolate to the surface on a level that, captured mainstream awareness in order for these governing bodies to do anything about it. Like, what's the state of the union now with governing bodies like that in terms of being proactive about mental health and preventing, that kind of thing from transpiring?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is there's a disconnect between athletes and these organizations, and that's not a condemnation of the organizations as much as it is just that's the reality. I mean, people have the mistaken perception that the gymnastics team, I mean, they're with USAG all of the time. I mean, that's their team, let's say, or USA Swimming, like, yeah, they're a part of the national team. But the reality is these athletes train and compete, often with their own coaches in a totally different area. They're not really interacting with the national governing body as frequently as people think. And so that disconnect comes into play because the national governing bodies don't necessarily, understand. They're not living with the challenges that these athletes, have. And they're somewhat desensitized to it, I think, until it smacks them in the face, and then maybe they do something. And so that's a big part of the problem. And so what is the role of the NGBs then? If they're not, developing these athletes, if they're not sort of managing them through their competitive careers, what are they doing? And the answer is they're charged with the responsibility of developing the sport, in the abstract, and to market the sport, which in many instances is to generate sponsorship opportunities for the governing body. And yes, they do fund some of those athletes to a degree, not nearly enough. And they run the events and they handle the broadcasts and all of that. That's so far away from the daily grind. That's so far away from the challenges that these individual athletes face on a day-to-day basis. And so the priorities are just totally different.
Movement has shaped my life. It's a teacher, it's a mirror into the soul, and it's a path that not only connects you more deeply with yourself, but also with others and the world we share. All paths require tools, and those tools matter. That's why I've partnered with On, a brand that honors this movement path with premium sportswear to support it. Everything that On makes is next level in design, clean, and always with function top of mind, lightweight, breathable, and built to adapt. It's gear that disappears on the body, so you can fully drop into the experience of movement. Head to on.com/richroll to explore their performance-driven collection. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp, and today I want to help you better by talking about workplace stress, which is something that is real and also something that's getting worse. In fact, 61% of people globally are dealing with higher than normal stress levels, which, when you understand the very real connection between chronically elevated stress levels and chronic lifestyle disease, is concerning. While we can't walk away from our jobs this summer, we can change our relationship with what we do, because while a vacation is great, that is not a long-term solution. A long-term solution requires we take steps towards reducing the negative emotions that we associate with our occupation, learning how to navigate daily challenges, set boundaries, develop coping skills, all of which are very difficult. I say this from personal experience, to do alone, which is where therapy comes in. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp offers access to a diverse range of mental health professionals with various areas of expertise. Unwind from work with BetterHelp. All of you can get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/richroll. Hey everybody, very quick ask. We are running an audience survey, and I'd love for you to take a moment to check it out at richroll.com/survey. Why are we doing this? Well, first and foremost, we really want to know you better. And the more we know who you are and what interests you most, the better that we can align the show with what matters most to you. The kinds of guests, conversations, and themes that you find most meaningful. Second, as you know, the show would not be possible without the amazing brand partnerships that support it, which of course means ad breaks, but I really want to make the experience the best it can be, better, more relevant, and frankly, less intrusive. And to do that, to do it well, we need to understand you a little bit better. So it's super simple, just 2 minutes tops. But it's a small, direct way you can help us keep evolving and improving the podcast. So thanks in advance. And again, please visit richroll.com/survey to fill out our audience survey. For the athlete, the kind of lived experience when they are struggling is a very quiet and private one, right? Because they feel like they're the only person who's experiencing this. And to admit it or to talk to somebody about it would would compel them to, it feels like a weakness, right? Like I have to be strong. Everybody's telling me just focus, get it done. And when you're having a problem, and I'm not even talking about going public with it, but just to like confront it is a very scary prospect. Perhaps scarier for that person than it would be for the average person who's struggling.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that.
It's like an existential threat to their career.
Yeah, and to acknowledge it is to become weaker in a way. That's I think how many athletes would think about it. But I mean, thinking back through some of Michael's experiences, I think that it was he has spoken openly about how I wasn't about to acknowledge any problem because I can't be seen as weak. I'll be vulnerable to my competitors. Mm-hmm. And that's just a very difficult situation. And I think one of the most impactful things he ever did was to just say, well, I that may be the case, but I just can't handle that anymore. And I'm just going to unload. And that's really what he did when he first opened up in a Sports Illustrated interview. He didn't have a plan to do that. He still can't articulate exactly why he did that. It just happened. But as he did it, it was like this burden just like evaporated. And in the end, he realized that didn't make me weaker. That may have made me stronger. Yeah, there was no calculation to that, which is what I find to be like most courageous about it or most desperate about it. Like he was at that point where there's no other route that I can take, but it opened that conversation up for a lot of other people because if he at his level is willing to talk about that, then I can do it.
Almost a survival move, right? Like the only way that I can move forward is if I unburden myself from this. Otherwise, it's too painful, right? And to have that cathartic experience and realize not only are you okay in the aftermath of that, but actually you feel empowered and it wasn't the threat that you imagined it to be. I would have to imagine that's where kind of the seed, was sown to help him realize like, oh, I have a voice in this that I think is important.
Yeah, I mean, I think speaking about it initially made him feel better. And then, interestingly, after he'd done that, people, I mean, he's recognizable everywhere he goes. I mean, it's something else. But everyone, if you think about it, they come up like, oh, I watched you. So, oh, thank you for, everything you've done for the country and, the team and all of that. And it was all about his, athletic accomplishments. But after he did that, people would come up to him and say, "Hey, thanks. I listened to what you said." And so it's the sharing of it alone, cathartic. But I think that it was a different feeling when he realized like I'm actually helping people, which is a very different phenomenon, I think. And so I think that he continued to do more and more of that. But when he was in Rio in 2016. And he was the old man of the team at that point. And he talks about how he's on the relay team. He's on the just about to go out to the podium, or he's on the podium, and these kids that are much younger than him at this point. He's looking at them. He says, "These kids are. I know what they're going through right now. I can see it, and they're in for it, and that's not okay. Like something has to be done." And so I think that's what sort of fueled his drive to address the problem however he could coming out of Rio. I mean, when he's out of, we'll go back and forth through each of the games by text and whatever. And then when he's done, then, I'll get him out of the village and we'll be together. And he called me when he finished up. He just finished the, his last event, and he'd done the mandatory press stuff. And he called, and it was the first thing he said. He said, "Look, I mean," he described that experience. He said, like that's what we're doing now. And with the same kind of conviction that he'd had when I first met him back in 2002, when he said, I want to change the sport of swimming, which may sound so vague and abstract, but it really wasn't about that. Here's a kid who, like, best ever in the sport. He's, awkward high school kid who the school doesn't even recognize as being this incredible athlete. It, I think, developed this chip on his shoulder. Like, swimming should be respected more than it is. I mean, it should be on Sports Center, which, again, if you're a high school kid at that time, that would be your measurement of whether it's relevant. And so that's what I think he meant by that. But that drove him in so many ways, not just for the sport, but, like, I think to prove himself.
I think that what's interesting about that is you have this kid with this incredible drive, right? Chip on his shoulder, this insane ability to, just put the blinders on and focus, like, to a superhuman level. Part of that is something to celebrate. There's another piece to that, like, not so good for life, right? And when you careen into a mental health crisis, the fear of contending with that, of course, is, well, if I go into therapy or what, I'm going to lose that thing that made me so great and brought me here. Like, I think that's, a big piece of it as well. He has this cathartic, experience and realizes he has another path. And what a gift, because now he can take that focus and that determination and channel it in a direction that is service-based. And that's, like, almost the only path that he could have found that was going to supplant or replace, like, these peak experiences that no human being on earth, there's nothing he could do for the rest of his life that's ever going to match that, right? Unless he finds a way to figure out how to make his life about something more than himself. And making swimming, like, more than it is, that's great, but it doesn't really go all the way. But, like, the mental health thing, like, that's something he could sink his teeth into for the rest of his life and be able to find meaning and purpose when so many athletes at the end of their career, having had peak experiences, like, really struggle because nothing is really going to match that.
And it's not, a lot of those skills are not applicable to day-to-day life.
And that's confusing because you're so good at one thing, and it requires a certain mindset that should be transferable to all these other areas of life. And I think that's another thing that disorients a lot of professional athletes in after retirement. Like, why can't I plug into something else in the way that I could plug into this one thing?
Yeah, and your expectations are that you're going to be really good at that as well. And you don't have the diversity of experience to make those easy lateral moves. So you've got to, like, reset your whole intention, I think, put the work in. I mean, I think that's very difficult. And if you've, from the age of 7 or whenever you showed yourself to be uniquely talented, I think that's where it's a realistic perspective within the sport. But once you're out of the sport, what's so special about being able to swim even a second faster than someone else, unless you're, like, being chased by, like, something, right? I mean,
it has no use.
It has no use. And that's the case with, what separates the best athletes from great athletes, from good athletes. It's, like, really sort of irrelevant skills to the rest of life. Mm-hmm. What's relevant, I think, is everything that the hard work, the drive, the competitiveness, the values, all of that, overcoming adversity, any number of things. That's what's applicable to the rest of life. And I think, honestly, like, that to me is the answer to youth sports. And I know it sounds totally, like, oversimplified, but I believe that it's a matter of perspective. I think that if you understand early on the value of those things, it's not going to detract from the competitive drive to be the best swimmer, to be the best tennis player, whatever it may be. It's just the purpose for it will be, a little bit different. You'll have a broader understanding of it. And so I think that, in thinking about, there's no fighting the tide with specialization. I don't think it's realistic right now for there to be, like, this epiphany, in our society to shift that. And, that's, I think, what, my kids' experiences has, informed for me. And it's like, okay, well, because if you don't specialize, nowadays, you don't even play high school sports.
Mm-hmm.
So if you value your athletic experience, right? If you value what you can get through sports, and I've gotten a lot through sports. I feel it'd be a real loss if my kids didn't have the opportunity to participate in competitive sports. But it's just amazing that to participate in high school varsity sport, you really do have to specialize.
Yeah.
Even if you're good enough, you almost have to specialize, because the high school coach also has a private club and is going to favor those kids that are within that club. So it's a very difficult ecosystem.
So what is your advice to the parents that are listening or watching who have either young kids or kids in high school who are active and in sports, and they're seeing this happen? Like, having kind of navigated that yourself, like, what can you tell them about how to help their kids kind of avoid the negative aspects of this systemic situation?
If you work backwards from, the Weight of Gold, which is the HBO documentary that we did, I think that, because you're talking about athletes, the very, very best athletes in the world in a variety of sports. But if you work backwards from there, okay, that's what you're driving towards.
So let's just explain for people who haven't seen that documentary what it is.
So Weight of Gold is... there are about a dozen of the very best Olympic athletes, U.S. athletes, that all sort of experienced the same letdown, either between games or after retiring, much of what we've been talking about. And they agreed to talk about it on camera and to, sort of describe how all of that impacted them. And what was really interesting is that it was a daunting prospect for them to do that, because while Michael had opened up about it, a lot of these other athletes hadn't. And I think because Michael was doing it, I think they felt, okay, I can do this.
You executive produced it with Michael, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's on HBO or HBO Max or whatever we're calling it these days, right? It came out a couple of years ago. It's been a while since I've seen it. Mandatory watching, but go ahead.
We produced it ourselves primarily because we feared that if we sought distribution, which we assumed we could get, that we'd have to forfeit control over the project. And that would, in my view, be too problematic for all of these athletes, that many of whom were talking about it for the first time. And so essentially, we just created a venue for these athletes to tell their story and talk about their experience, and with the assurance that no one's going to see this if you're not comfortable with it. And I think that that allowed for pretty candid conversations. But what was interesting is, you do these interviews, and each athlete had no idea what their fellow athlete had said in their interview. It's not like they were all doing this within the same room. But when they got together afterwards, right, and they were able to see, what the other athletes had said, it was such a common experience. And they were blown away. They're like, I can't believe that anybody else felt this way. And so I think that that's a really powerful thing. And I think as a parent, if you say, wow, these are literally all of the best athletes in the Olympic space, and these are the struggles that they're going through. This is really difficult. I didn't realize that. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't aspire to be, great within sport. It doesn't mean you shouldn't, drive to realize your potential at all. But I do think that as a parent, if you listen to these athletes and you hear what they're saying in terms of that imbalance and the idea that, well, the purpose of this is to succeed competitively relative to peers, and that's going to be the answer, I don't think it will ever be the answer. And it doesn't have to be the answer, right? I mean, it's the process. It's becoming your best person, and that process. And I think that's just a shift in perspective that I get it down the road may be difficult to shift. But I think if you were to start when they're younger, to give them an appreciation for process over results, I don't think it would undermine, the advancement within sport, but I do think it would help to insulate kids from, some of the disappointment when the results, whether they achieve them or not, don't answer all of their questions.
Yeah. Well, given the state of affairs with organized sports, from a parental point of view, basically what I'm getting from this is like you have to be proactive, right? You have to insert yourself to care for your child and, act in their own, kind of long-term best interests so that they're learning the lessons for life that everyone should from sport, and not become this, battery from which we're just supposed to extract revenue and, accolades and fame, right? That's sort of like the incentive structure here. And you have to cut across the grain and circumvent that, I guess, on some level. Like of course, every parent, should be doing these things for their kid, but like you shouldn't have to, go to war with the organizations or, the powers that be or the coaches or whatever it is in order to do that. Like it should just naturally be that.
So this has been how I think of it before my kids ever started youth sports, because I was dealing with athletes that were struggling coming out of each Olympics and with that imbalance. And so I wanted to encourage my kids to play sports. I wanted to support that, but I also felt really strongly about, multiple sports, sort of keeping a healthy perspective, all of that. It made me sick to, see signs up in the hockey rink, like, D1, you can go that type of thing to get kids into the program. And I mean, all of that frustrated me greatly. So, the only way I could deal with it, the only way I could, feel okay about my kids being in that system was if I coached. You'd have to have that level of I don't know, involvement, I think. And even that was really difficult because you're coaching, but you have all of the other parents. You have the administration of the league. You have all of that. It's really, really difficult. I would preach to my kids about all of these things. And, it's like they would obviously follow Michael. They knew a lot of these different athletes. But I wouldn't talk about, the number of medals. I wouldn't talk about that. I would just say, let's talk about this other stuff. Some of the challenges they're having and why. And despite all of that, and despite the fact that they played multiple sports, my kids, it really wasn't enough because they also wanted to play in high school or college. And to do that, they did have to specialize. And at a certain point, it was like, I have a son who's just finished up his sophomore year. He plays baseball in college. And he wanted to play college baseball. And so he played 3 sports and then, obviously had to commit to try to play in college. And that's just what he wanted to do. And, we'd have conversations like that's fantastic if that's what you want to do, but understand that you're going to college to learn and that, it's like what you're getting out of, you're not going to go pro. Okay. So or the odds are against it. I was unapologetic about that assessment. And in fact, if he were to go pro, it would be because I said he's not. So I'm not doing him a great disservice.
Which is kind of, even harder. It's like here, my dad knows all the great athletes, and then so he has there's a level of credibility there that is sort of crushing.
But he it's so you have to specialize, and despite all of that, I had that perspective. I had those tools. Not everybody gets to see athletes that are at the very top, maybe ever, of their sport, and some of the challenges and the imbalance and the things that the people don't see that you might not want for your child. And there was no stopping, my son from wanting to play. And so he's part of that system. And I could see how, the impact that it would have if he, wasn't recruited by a certain school, the impact it would have if he had a bad game or whatever it might be. And so I'm watching on, sort of the front end, like, whoa, it's all by degree, of course, but it's having it's the same effect that I see among the Olympians. It's just happening. He's had more diversity of experience. He's getting an education and all of that. But still, it was, as a parent, it was like, what do you do?
Yeah, despite all of your best efforts to buffer against that.
Yeah. And I think finally I accepted that specialization it's unavoidable right now, probably for a while. Because if you want to play a sport, it's also competitive now, and the system is what it is. It's necessary. And so at that point, I thought, like, well, what do you do then? Like, does that mean all of these kids are going to, end up at this, moment of existential threat? And is there nothing that can be done about it? So as a parent, it was kind of out of desperation, but I thought he's not going to listen to me. I think somehow he's got to come to this on his own. Mm-hmm. I wrote a book for him in a way that he wouldn't know it was written by me.
From you. Yeah. In situations like this, they can't hear it from the parent, mm-hmm. They need to hear it from some sort of mentor figure that they respect that isn't you.
Yeah. And the idea was simply like, all I can do, best I can think of to do, is to try to shift his perspective from results to process. And I studied philosophy in college. It's what I like, it's what I'm interested in. It's what I read. And it was out of desperation, really, because I just wanted to do what I could to help him. But I thought, like, look, you've got Zen masters, right, that are the very best archers, let's say, swordsmen, whatever. It's all about specialization. And yet it's nothing about archery. There's the answer, in my mind, right? In the sense that, like, they are able to develop this strength of mind, this balance, because they specialize or through specialization. And they know all the while that it's not the result. It's not becoming a master archer. It's about mastering your own mind. Doesn't mean you're not going to, care about the results. If you get shelled as a pitcher, it's going to suck. But at the same time, if you recognize that it's the process and you go about it with that different perspective, that's a huge change. So a minor shift in perspective could be a huge change in terms of your resilience, in terms of what you think you're taking out of this sport each day, the progress you're making. That has nothing to do with results, that has nothing to do with a good or bad call. So much of that, if you're staking your identity on a result that could be determined by a bad call, that's a pretty tough situation.
That you're a fragile human then. You're not a fully formed human.
Right.
The Zen archer example is a way of saying, how you do anything is how you do everything. And the answers are always in just how present you can be with whatever it is you're doing. And when you are identifying yourself with destinations and results, you're future tripping on something that hasn't happened yet. And you're giving value, you're placing value on that, how you value yourself and how you think other people are going to value you. When in fact, it's mastering the capacity of your mind to be fully present in whatever you're doing that is the solution to, all the questions you're asking yourself. Like, it's a very profound thing, but also like very practical. And anybody, I'm sure you would agree with all the athletes that you've worked with who has been able to sustain success over a long period of time is solely because they are about the process and not the destination, right? You have to, on some level, hold on to what it was you loved about that sport or whatever activity it was to begin with in order to be fully engaged with process over destination.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's interesting because I listened to an interview with one of the best wrestlers in the world, and he was recounting how he struggled at certain events and then came to the realization that he was thinking too much about that result, and at a certain point he just said, hell with it, I'm just going to wrestle. But that he sort of happened upon that realization after already becoming one of the best wrestlers in the world. That's the opportunity, I think. It's like, can you help athletes like develop that perspective, or at least acquire an appreciation for that earlier on in the process? And in my view, I think that's one of the most valuable thing about sports. I mean, you say it's a difficult thing to remain present given all that's thrown at you in life. But I think sports, it's not life and death, but it feels like it, doesn't it? It feels like it so often when you're competing. And I think that's the beauty of sports. And so, we laugh about how useful is it to swim like a second fast or 100th of a second faster? Like maybe not, but the pressure that you put yourself through and to succeed, even to advance, like it doesn't matter if you win gold, it doesn't matter what your time is, just to progress and advance, more and more of it becomes mental. And I think you develop this capacity to equalize. You develop the ability to sort of be in the moment, remain in the moment, and I think deal with pressure. And that is, in my experience, the most valuable thing that you can take out of sports. And it's unique because maybe you could have done it back in the day by actually having to fight for your life, but that's not realistic now. But sports does an amazing job of creating this tension and this pressure. And if you want to advance through it, you simply have to become mentally strong. And I think that's, creating more of an appreciation for that, not just the results. Yeah, I think that's really important.
A few years ago, this guy, Joe Chura, rings me up out of the blue, and he asks if I'll fly out to Illinois and speak at this event that he was hosting called Go, oriented around taking inspired action. And it wasn't until Jesse Itzler's Running Man event that I realized he had taken inspired action himself by creating this new enterprise that was also called Go Brewing, in fact, which from Go has grown into one of the most exciting revolutions in craft brewing. Hear that? So good. One of the many things that makes Go Brewing extraordinary is that they don't outsource like most companies. They handcraft everything from scratch in small batches. In fact, this commitment to quality has fueled their growth into one of America's fastest growing breweries, now in over 5,000 locations across 20 states and available online. The Salty AF Chelada earned the Untapped #1 non-alcoholic lager in the United States, and they're constantly creating bold new flavors almost every month that push the boundaries of what non-alcoholic beer can be. The non-alcoholic revolution is here, people. I am proud to help champion it alongside Joe. So get on board by getting with Go by going to gobrewing.com, where you're going to use the code RichRoll for 15% off your first purchase. Go. This past year, I unlocked a major life dream, which was to build my own home gym. When it came to selecting the equipment for my gym, I looked at a lot of stuff, and what came out on top was NordiTrack, because what they're doing right now is truly next level, exemplified by my favorite piece of kit, their commercial X32i treadmill, which simulates real-world terrain with an incredible 40% incline and 6% decline. The S27i Studio bike mimics road conditions, and the RW900 rower, it's smooth, it's fluid, and built to keep momentum effortless. But what really sets us apart is iFit Pro. Their new AI coach builds personal plans, schedules workouts, and keeps you accountable all through simple text exchanges. So stop stalling your progress because you don't know what to do next. Get 10% off with any purchase of $999 plus with the code RICHROLL. There's a difference between managing all those externalities and pressures from a place of like peace and equanimity versus compartmentalizing all the fear. You know what I mean? That's sort of like the amateur version is like, I'm scared, I'm afraid, I don't think I'm good enough, I don't know how to handle all these people coming, all of that. Like I'll repress it, I'll push it away, I'll pretend it's not there. And that works for a while until it doesn't, right? Mastery is the Zen archer example of like understanding that the only thing that you have control over is your behavior and how you respond to the world, and developing the capacity to be malleable and be cool with it, whatever's coming at you with a deeper self-confidence that you'll be able to manage it. I had John Florence on the podcast recently, world champion surfer, and he shared this really fascinating story. Like, this is a kid who, from the minute he was like this grom, on the beach, everybody telling him he's going to be the next Kelly Slater. And to some extent early on, he was sort of living up to that, like won back-to-back world championships. But then he was losing a lot and got injured and just, had 7 years where, he was kind of awash a little bit. And he ultimately won the world championships again this past year. And the way that he did it, well, there's a lot that went into it, but a big piece of it was that very thing, like just being okay. Like when you're out there in the waves, like you have no control over what wave you're going to get and what everybody else is doing. Like the variables are infinite, right? How can he be okay with whatever's happening and, kind of arrest the looping mind and just remember, like, I know how to surf. Like, I don't have to think about this. What I have to do is stop thinking about it and just allow myself to be and tap into that like deeper reservoir of confidence. And one of the tools that he used that I thought was super interesting was a visualization tool, but not the normal one where an athlete is, imagining every step of the race or the competition and, what it's going to feel like when their hand hits the wall, 1/100th of a second, before the other guy. But instead visualizing how he wanted to feel emotionally, like when he was out in the set. Like I want to feel good. I want to feel happy. I want to feel confident. I want to feel calm, and like rehearsing that state of mind so that when he's there, he can like channel that or tap into that, like drop into that state. And I think that's a really powerful twist on that normal practice of visualization that you typically hear about.
Yeah, I think that's strong. Yeah.
True or false? You almost passed on signing Michael Phelps.
Well, I'd say it's true that I almost failed to sign Michael Phelps, but
the story I heard is that Bowman was trying to get your attention, and this is early. Michael's super young, and you were like representing snowboarders at the time, right?
Yeah, I had. He had unique potential even at that age. He was, I was aware of him, but it's a big decision, as you know, to forego college within swimming and go pro. Mm-hmm. Not that many swimmers have done that because it's a great system to go through to swim in college. And so, when he made that decision, then it became like a concerted effort to sign with an agent and do all of that. But when they reached out to me, I just happened to be like, if I was maybe 2 weeks from going to Salt Lake City with a significant roster of athletes. It's a busy time. Mm-hmm. I said, yeah, I'm very interested, but it's going to have to wait because I've got, commitment to these athletes, and it's going to go for probably a few weeks after the games. But after that, I would love to meet. And, understandably, when you start that process, I think Michael wanted to make a decision and get on with it. And so the story that Bob and Michael had told me since is that like, yeah, they were really antsy to make a decision. And Bob, saw me on the Today Show talking about marketing snowboarders, which at the time was sort of an emerging sport. And he said, well, we got to wait. Let's wait. Let's give him some time. And it was probably, at least 3 weeks after the games, if not a month, because, the clients that I had in Salt Lake did really well. And so then you're running around doing all sorts of things. And, but eventually they did, fortunately, wait to commit. And we had a good meeting down in Baltimore, and they decided to.
The rest is history.
Yeah,
I mean, how long has this relationship been going on?
2002.
Wow, that long, yeah.
Yeah, a long time. He was 17.
How do you describe your philosophy of what you do? Like, I see you, like, you're a sports agent. You're a very distinguished, successful one. But I think you're unique in many ways. So, like, how do you put words to what it is that you do and the kind of meaning and philosophy behind it?
Well, that's a big question. I don't know. I think that the way I got into it helped me in the sense that there was no path to follow. I had no mentor, so when I started to work with these athletes in sport, like initially, snowboarding in particular, it was about how can I help these athletes, become recognizable to a bigger audience, become more relevant to that audience. And it really was more than anything else was like a communications exercise, right? It's PR and then if you do that well, the rest sort of the commercial stuff will come if their results are there. But I think in terms of philosophy, it's I would try to understand what each of them wanted to get out of it. I mean, it's the obvious stuff. It's like, well, I'd like to, be able to continue to compete. And honestly, it's that. It's not making money for, the overwhelming majority of these athletes. It's about, can I stay in the sport? Can I earn enough money to not have to work a job so that I can realize my potential and that sort of thing? And so, that's the obvious stuff. But in terms of like, okay, well, what is the story that you're telling? Who are the partners that might be aligned with that? I mean, what are we building together? And I think that's just a matter of like, trying to be proactive, understand, what each athlete's about, and then not waiting for the opportunities to come, but trying to get out in front of it. And I think that's the approach that we try to take.
To me, it feels like it extends well beyond like what you think of a manager's role is, which is just to like, be a deal maker. Like, I see you as somebody who is a creative partner who's always thinking long term. And, it's a very interesting world, this world of like Olympic sports, because for the vast majority of the athletes, they're under the radar and only emerge once every 4 years in this very heightened situation in which the stakes are very high. And you, as their representative, have to plan for that, strategize around that, and be ready to kind of pounce and execute on deals that, might happen in the immediate aftermath of a performance before, the window closes and the halo effect is over. And to do that by thinking about their best interest long term, like who are the partners that are going to serve this person where there's mutual benefit and there's some path that's going to at least bridge them to the next Olympiad, because memory is short and, people forget, as we were talking about earlier, immediately, like what happened. And that's very different than representing an NBA athlete or an NFL athlete where these people are in the public consciousness, like, for most of the year, kind of persistently year after year.
Yeah, they have a platform that they don't have to create and maintain, whereas Olympic athletes don't. I mean, their platform is, for the most part, every 4 years. And so, I think strategically from the beginning, it was, okay, we can do business around the games, like that year around the games, and then you'll have to wait And maybe if they continue, a year prior to the next games, there'll be more activity. And that just seemed like a pretty lousy way to do it. So I think it was, strategically, it's about how can you create and maintain a platform for exposure that the athletes, can have more control over. And however small it may be, and I think that's where if it's only sustainable if it's aligned with who they are and what they actually want to do. But I think each media opportunity, each partner activation should be aligned, should be strategic. That's the key. Like, treat each of these things as a platform and try to integrate all of them strategically. And if you do that,
so it's all telling one story.
Yeah, and they'll weave together. And if you've got 3 overlapping partners activating in a similar way, or amplifying the same message, well, that's not dependent upon world championships necessarily. That's not dependent upon the games. And you start to create a bridge between the games. And I think that's the most valuable thing you can do for athletes, I think, from my standpoint. And that's gotten a lot easier, more recently because of social media and just content. But, certainly back in late 90s and early 2000s, it was tricky because you really, you had, a couple of televised events and that's it. And so
the social media aspect of it has changed the game in so many ways, for better and for worse. Like in Paris, we saw the emergence of stars that we wouldn't have expected, but for social media, by these athletes sort of taking responsibility for telling their own story and doing it in a way that was so captivating that it almost didn't matter how well they performed. Like the world fell in love with them, like Ilona Maher, the rugby player, is probably the best example of that, which is exciting for the young athlete, where it isn't necessarily just about medals, but they're being given this platform to tell their own story. And if they do it well, like, they can have a similar experience. At the same time, there's this burden, I think, that athletes now feel that they have to be a brand and they have to be filming everything and capturing everything. And it's not enough just to, aspire to be the best in the world at something. They also have to run a production company around themselves and, are constantly in this process of, content creation, which, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but is certainly, an added burden, if not a total distraction from them just doing the thing. And I would imagine there's a lot of athletes who are like, I don't want to do that. I just want to, like, why can't I just, do the sport? Like, why is it now expected that I also have to do that?
There's pressure to do that from a lot of different sources, but I mean, it's part of every deal that these athletes do now. I mean, they're, social media activation, it becomes an entitlement to the company and an obligation for the athlete. And they value the partnership, not entirely because of social media, but it's a significant factor. And so you could have that athlete that just said, look, I get it, but I'm not into it. And I am just going to be the best athlete I can be. And hopefully, commercial interest is still there. And it probably would be, right? But it's a matter of degree. And there's a lot of temptation to like maximize that value while you can, especially where, that could be, your funding to continue within the sport. And so, yeah, I think social media, it in my view, only works if it's authentic, but it can't be authentic for all of what's happening.
It's not for everyone.
Right.
Are you starting to see deal flow around AI, like NIL rights around AI? For example, like, we want to scan Michael's body, and then we can insert him into commercials in Japan and things like that. Like, is that happening yet?
Yeah, there are conversations around AI that are happening more now, but that sort of thing, haven't really seen in terms of like performance. I mean, the closest we've gotten on that was this is years ago, before the whole AI thing, but it was holograms.
I remember that.
They wanted to scan him in, and with the thinking that if they scanned him in, he could be everywhere at once, and he could be doing appearances all over the world.
This is going to happen, though. I would imagine. This is on the near horizon, I think.
Oh, I think from a performance standpoint, you must see that, right? I mean, it's in terms of evaluating all of the data and
yeah, I mean, sort of in my space, it's like you can create your own AI that like knows everything that you've, like every podcast episode, or you can create like an encyclopedia out of that, or like a research tool for that. And I've already, I've been deep faked a couple times. I'm sure like your clients probably have as well. And you kind of go to battle with that and play defense against that. But soon, and this is something Hollywood is, going to be dealing with. It's like, oh, well, we can just recreate Cary Grant and like put him in a movie, and no one, it's going to look exactly like he did. Like this is the world that we're tiptoeing into, where NIL takes on a whole different like flavor of what it represents, and what it would mean to do that. Like when somebody's still young and vital, to say, okay, do that. It's one thing if you're Cary Grant, there's an estate, that person's dead. But like when they're still alive, to be having facsimiles of you, like, doing commercials and things like that, like it's going to get very strange very soon, I think.
I think it's all going to change very rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It does feel like the Olympics are back though. Paris, was really something special. I think that it was a definitive statement that the world still loves the Olympics. And now we're in this ramp up to LA 28. And I know that you have to strategize and think about, what that represents for your clients and be planning well in advance. So where's your head around LA 28 and what this experience is going to be like?
Well, it's just it's a huge opportunity because of the platform that it's in the U.S. If you look at the investment into, the LA Games and what it will mean for the American audience, I mean, it's just a huge opportunity for any athlete. So whatever potential they may have, and we're talking about, in terms of building a brand or commercially, I mean, it's not going to be any different in terms of the competitive results, but in terms of building and generating commercial opportunities, it'll be that much easier, that much more productive for them. The appetite for activation around athletes will be far greater than we've seen in a while. And so it's the same strategy. I mean, it's what are you trying to accomplish? And okay, we have more options now.
Mm-hmm.
So let's think about how we're going to, pursue them. The biggest difference is that it's just, I think the scale of the opportunities and the demand will be that much greater. And we're seeing that. I mean, the Winter Games were less than a year away. And Winter Games are always, less significant than the Summer Games from a commercial standpoint, but it's almost like the LA and Milan Cortina, they're like proceeding on parallel paths.
Mm-hmm.
We've got just as much business, relating to the Summer Games as we do winter already. And that's pretty rare. Usually, there's a shift and with summer, it would come immediately after the Winter Games because it is such a bigger opportunity. But no, I think now there's a lot of preparation and again, opportunity for the athletes, for the sports. I mean, some of these sports that have been recently added to the games or more emerging, I think, every sport has a bigger opportunity and it's a unique opportunity that won't come again necessarily in some time. So, they should be planning and really working hard between now and then.
As somebody who has so many relationships with just incredibly high performing athletes, what are some of the shared common traits that these individuals have that normal, everyday people, don't have? Like, do you see themes that emerge from all the young athletes that you work with where you can kind of identify what makes them so special and different?
I think by the time I come to know them, they've distinguished themselves from a athletic standpoint. But I think what they have in common is competitiveness. And by that, I mean, I can't take credit for it. It's Eddie Reese, who's a
legendary Texas swimming coach.
Yeah. And longtime like U.S. Olympic coach and all of that. But
beloved.
Beloved. And he had a great quote that I think answers your question better than I could, which is he had said at one point, of the all American swimmers, 80% love to win, 20% hate to lose. The Olympic team is comprised of the 20%. And if I think of not all of my clients, but the clients that have really been at the highest level of their sport, it's like you take that 20% and who hates to lose most, I think that's what separates, these athletes at the very top, because that would inform what they do every single day and how they're going to react in that moment when it matters most.
This brings it all the way back to the mental health conversation, because fundamentally, if your fuel is that you hate to lose, that's dysfunctional. That's very different from like, I want to be the best version of myself. And if what it takes to be on the top of that podium is hating to lose, like, what is the origin of that hate? Like what's underneath that drive, right? And generally there's going to be something, that is probably going to show up later in life in not a great way. So it's like,
no doubt,
the whole thing is like, rigged for, dysfunctional mental health. And that's what it's like. Okay, well, if you solve for mental health, then, you're going to basically take that 20% off the table.
Well, yeah, it'd be really fascinating to take the 20% or even like the top 10% of the 20% and go back and try to identify like a common denominator there. But I think, we talk about Michael and we talk about any of the athletes, but where Michael's spoken so much about it, I think he had a chip on his shoulder. Okay, but what's a chip on your shoulder? I think it's ego, which is, in my view, insecurity. And I think that is what drives so much of the competitiveness that we all feel. I think about it, it's like, it's like if you really honestly boil it down, it's insecurity. It's fear of failure that somehow you can't comprehend losing because that is the existential threat.
Right. So not to play, armchair psychologist here, but in Michael's case, like if you remove the absentee dad aspect of the whole thing, like does it all cave in? Like because, there was this, it's a childhood trauma, right? Like you don't have a dad, right? Yeah. And so what does that do to your young psyche? And at what point does that motivate you or drive you with this desire to, feel worthy and be seen? Like, okay, he rejected me. So I need to distinguish myself as worthy of love. And the way I'm going to do that is to just be undeniable.
Yeah. But I think that certainly comes into play, but so too does, like, he had ADHD and, he was told by teachers that he'd never amount to anything. There are probably
there's
myriad
different 1,000 cuts along the way.
Right, exactly. And it all, and it's how he processed that uniquely. But I would imagine that you could find, that combination of factors among these great athletes that create that need to win, however unhealthy it may be. And I think you could do the same in business. I think you could do the same in so many different areas of life. I know that the highest level of business, at least as I've been exposed to it in terms of like, okay, if we're dealing with companies or media or whatever, there's an imbalance that I think is common among them. And I think that ego and insecurity has to come into play. You may not know that story, but that's what I've come to believe anyway.
Yeah, it's tension. You need to be balanced fundamentally as a human being if you're gonna live a meaningful life, right? But if you want to achieve some insane level of greatness, that demands you be out of balance. And in order to, have the motivation to go out of balance to that degree, you have to be, there has to be some kind of like mental tweak there.
Yeah, I guess the question is, can you compete as ferociously as you need to and still be okay if you don't win?
Right.
I like to believe that you can. I mean, if you couldn't, then where's the Zen master archer?
Yeah. I think that challenges the Yogi Berra quote. Like, is it really the 20% who can't stand to lose, or is it the people who are so committed to excellence within themselves that anything short of that is somewhat intolerable? So it's not about beating other people or losing to another individual. It's the demands you place on yourself, right?
Yeah, but the demands shouldn't be results oriented. I mean, right. I think it's really fascinating because each sport offers like a different opportunity to challenge that mindset. My son's a pitcher, so I just like end up thinking about that more. But you're setting yourself up for failure if you're going to feel different depending upon whether you win or lose, depending upon whether you get out of an inning. I mean, because there are conditions that you cannot control. The results do not reflect
your value as a human being,
or even your value as a pitcher. Everything, you could do everything perfectly, and it's just a bad call. Happens all the time. I mean, you watch baseball with anybody, you won't go through a single at bat without having a difference of opinion in terms of a call. Luck comes into play, chance. So, I mean, it may be unrealistic, but I think the right objective is challenge yourself to feel the very same way from the beginning of the game to the end, no matter what the result. And I think that's achievable. I think it requires a certain perspective, and you have to go through this process. I mean, I think you have to really work to get to the point where you can like maintain that perspective and that calm. But if you think about it, like, if you're pitching the way you want to pitch, the results won't necessarily reflect that. So can you go through that game despite all of those like uncontrollable conditions, bad results, whatever, and feel the same way? You may feel badly because I did this wrong. Okay, that's different. That's not results. That's sort of like the physical process whereby you're pitching. But in terms of results, win, lose, did you get a hit, what was a strike or a ball, those things, it's irrational to tie your, frame of mind to those results.
The way into that is failure is such a terrible word. Like, there should be a different word that frames it or gives it the connotation of growth opportunity. Like, when something goes wrong, like, that's when you learn about how to course correct and do it better the next time. And if we could just be curious about that rather than lambast ourselves and self-identify with it, I think we'd all be better off. But something about our human wiring, kind of gets in the way.
Yeah, it's what we drive to a certain result. But I mean, it's now, I've heard it in other places. The first time I ever heard it was Michael and I were in Singapore, and we went to an MMA fight there. And the athlete who was favored lost, but said, "Hey, win or learn." And I just thought that was like, yeah, right. And which is more valuable, right? I mean, it's hard to think that way.
And Michael's like, "Yeah, no thanks."
That's a rhetorical question.
Yeah, like, tell him, like, it might have been better if you lost that race. You would have been like, no.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's the difference between theory and practice. And the greatest, is like, okay, well, you're the best. So, you figured something out, everybody else didn't. And yet we're still saying, like, hey, maybe a little more balance, maybe a little bit more diversity, maybe all these things that, are just so foreign to somebody who is that focused and determined. And it is that thing that took them to that place.
Yeah, I mean, compartmentalization works to a point. I mean, Michael, he's a great swimmer, and he worked so hard, and he's built for it. And he's be the first one to tell you, like, he was very good at compartmentalizing and amazing under pressure. So in that moment when people may tighten up a bit, he didn't. And And so you could say, like, that's the recipe. That's what you want. And I think it may be in a very narrow sense. But again, the question that I would pose is, can you achieve that with a different perspective?
Right.
And I
that's,
think
that's scary. That's very scary because it's basically threatening your whole like worldview.
Yeah, I think you can't. I think it's too much of a shift at that point. But the question is, well, what if you started that? What if you took a different approach, at the youth level?
Right.
Or along the way. A Zen master archer, a Zen master in anything, you don't know how long that's going to take. It's a painful experience, right? I mean, there's a process. And to me, the process is the pressure is going to, you're thinking it's going to impact your performance. And it's not until you get past that it all starts to flow. And I think that's why can't it work that way in sports?
Well, that's mastery. I mean, that's mental mastery of your own mind. All of that pressure, you think it's real. It's a story you're telling yourself. Like, you can choose to have a different experience. It's your relationship with it, right? And I think that ability to, the archer has to be completely in the moment, present without any kind of interfering thought. It's only then that you can tap into that flow and unleash the best, performance that you're capable of. But at the Olympic level, when that pressure is so intense, that story is just so loud.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think it's something you have to cultivate over a longer period of time, probably. But I think it is a difference in perspective in the sense that you'd view the setbacks very differently, the failures, right? You'd view them differently, and they would appear to you as progress in some way, as opposed to a setback.
Well, these low moments, are our greatest teachers, and ultimately, in many cases, become the growth accelerators. Like when you think about what Michael went through in that that like dark period of his life, and I'm interested in like how you helped to guide him through that. I'm sure he looks back on that now as a gift because it's given him, this new life and this new sense of purpose. So we're not very good at judging the merits of these situations when we're in them. And it's only in retrospect or how we develop a relationship with them. And in the best case, use them as fuel to grow in new and interesting ways that they become like these gifts instead of like failures to be ashamed of or to feel guilty about.
Yeah.
There's not going to be a revolution where you're going to tear down the structures of youth sports, et cetera. But let's just say in some parallel universe, you got nominated to some federal government position of power, like, presidential fitness guru, or something like that, where you had the authority to make certain changes in youth sports, high school sports, et cetera. Like, what kind of programs would you like to see implemented and developed and funded that could create, a new generation of young athletes who are more kind of mentally fit around the ideas we've been talking about?
Yeah, it's funny. I think if you look at like the bylaws of some of these organizations, or even at like the local level, like the Maine Principals Association, which governs high schools, all of the sports in Maine, for example, and it's like a lot of the values are there in writing, like the right ones, the balance, and here's the purpose of high school sports, and it's written there, but it's not enforced in that way. It's nothing that is done is, reflects those values. And so I think it's a matter of, staying true to, like, let's think about it. Why are we spending so much time and so much money on sports? I'm talking from the youth level through high school, towns, cities, municipalities, like the money that is invested in sport. And I'm not saying that shouldn't happen. I'm just saying we should all be like cognizant of the reason for it. What is the purpose? What is the purpose of sports in the lives of all of these kids? Because the sacrifices that families make, that parents make, the cost. I mean, if you total up what is spent, from the time your kid gets into sports to they graduate from high school, and that's the end of. I mean, the overwhelming majority of high school athletes, they're done then. And you take all of that money, and then what's left for college? I mean, the average family struggles for that cost, and so it doesn't mean that it doesn't make sense. But I think at the outset, that should be a consideration in terms of like what are we getting out of this? What is the purpose of this? And then from an administrative standpoint, how can we support that? And I mean, part of that is I think you have to consider, okay, the privatization of youth sports and these clubs. How are they integrating with community programs? How are they integrating with school programs? Is access to sports equal among kids? All of those things I think are really important. But the biggest shift would come from the very beginning to instill in kids an understanding of why you're playing sports and what you'll likely get out of it. Mm-hmm. And to somehow counter the idea that that whoever lost that game is suffering in some way, or whoever won 3 games in a row is a more valuable individual. I mean, you've got to, I think, counter that and have open conversations about it. And I think those conversations shouldn't just be about technique. It shouldn't just be about the sport itself, but rather a more abstract conversation to try to get kids just understanding that, used to talking about it, get parents, familiar with those ideas. So you're really just revisiting, what is the fundamental purpose for any of this?
Easier said than done.
For sure.
Yeah. There's also a question of like, okay, well, whose responsibility is that? Is it the coaches? It's the parents? Is it the athletic departments? Is it the organizing bodies? And I think until there is some kind of infrastructure or, kind of guiding principles around that, it just gets passed around like, that's not my job. That's the parents' job. That's the coaches, so nothing ever kind of gets done. But I think where I feel optimistic about it is just that this conversation is happening and young people are having it. And there's a cultural shift in our relationship with mental health from something that, would be considered a weakness or something you should feel bad about or hide from other people to very normalized. And I think that is, there's a lot of credit that's due to Michael and Simone and other people who are advancing that right now. And I think that is the biggest impact on the next generation in terms of how they think about their own well-being.
Yeah, I agree. And that the number of athletes that openly, talk about their challenges and their struggles, I mean, it's changed so dramatically over just the past 5 years.
Yeah.
And I think
to see press conferences where they're like, they just flat out, like, we'll just tell you like what's, it's like that would have never happened.
Yeah.
Even like, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's huge progress.
You're a legend. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. And, I love everything that you're doing, and I think you're a force for good in this world of sport and mental well-being. So thanks for talking to me today.
Thank you, Rich. It's been a real pleasure.
Appreciate it. See you in LA in 28,
Indeed.
if not sooner. Cheers.